So this, welcome, by the way, to the first of my, Halloween, at least, themed podcasts. Whether this continues beyond October remains to be seen. So, good start. Strong start. The intention of this was that I was going to watch a different horror film every day of October, something I've planned and thought about doing many years in a row and have never bothered. And so last night, the 1st of October 2017, I sat down to watch When a Stranger Calls, the original 1979 version. I thought it was 1979, which I should have checked. Should have checked that before I started. And I was sort of sat here, mic plugged in, Audacity open, pondering how best to begin. And I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll have a look on Rotten Tomatoes and see what its kind of cumulative, aggregate, whatever, score is. And that might give me a kind of a springboard. And I read the movie info, which I presume is still there if you decide to go and check. Which says, in this thriller, a babysitter is terrorised by an anonymous telephone caller who turns out to be a particularly persistent serial killer. Now, a couple of things about that. Persistent serial killer. Now, is she, whoever wrote this, referencing the number of times they call the babysitter in the film? Because if you watch the film, it's fairly clear why it is that the killer is repeatedly calling her. I think calling him persistent sort of I don't know, it sort of detracts a little bit from proceedings, I think. But that's just me. Or are they referencing the fact that he's a serial killer, and serial killers sort of by their nature are sort of fairly persistent. Anyway, it continues. When a stranger calls to ask, have you checked the children lately? Now, that's not from memory of last night. Now, obviously, it's been a few hours since I watched it. I think if the phone had rung and she'd answered it and he'd said, have you checked the children lately? It would detract a little bit from the meaning. In fact, I'm going to go so far as to say, let's see what that might have been like.
Hello?
Have you checked the children lately? Now, I don't think it's just my imagination. I don't think that has quite the same impact as him just simply saying, have you checked the children? But maybe I'm not saying it right. Maybe I'm not saying it right.
Hello?
Hiya. Have you had an opportunity to check on the children lately? Clearly ridiculous. Anyway, so When a Stranger Calls, 1979. For those who are curious, the music's a lot louder than I expected it to be. 33% it got as a tomatometer score on Rotten Tomatoes. Right, so one of the comments says, two movies, one sandwiched inside the other, and two movies have completely different goals, tones, and arguably even genres. I slightly agree with that to some extent. The first kind of 20 minutes, I mean, famously, the first 20 minutes of this film is kind of quite highly regarded by people for being, a kind of a sort of how-to of tension and stuff like that. They put it better than I did. And then the rest of the film is a sort of different animal. I agree with that to some extent. However, I don't know that I necessarily agree that they're different genres. I think all the way through the film you know that he's going to go after the babysitter again at some point. I think you know that from the end of that first bit, first act, if you like. And so to some extent there's that level of tension that keeps you kind of, when's it going to happen? And there's this woman that he meets in a bar that he becomes kind of mildly obsessed. Well, I say mildly obsessed, like being obsessed with somebody is a sliding scale from mildly obsessed, such as following her home, walking into her apartment after her, sitting down, getting all up in her face, demanding that she be his friend, all that sort of thing, right the way through to the other side of the scale of like dangerously obsessive. This music is really, really off-putting. Dangerously obsessive. God only knows what happens then. I think all of that is really tense as well, and you've got this guy that's hired by the parents of the kids that get murdered at the start. Oh, hello. Get murdered at the start. Spoilers. Should be fairly obvious, I would have thought there's going to be spoilers in this. He basically hires the policeman that was in charge of the investigation at the beginning to track down the killer because he's escaped, because, he escaped. And so you've got the tension of is he gonna find the guy? Is he gonna, when he comes face to face with him, what's going to happen there? So I don't necessarily agree that it's two different genres. I just think that the opening 20 or so minutes is just incredibly tense, brilliantly put together. There's a shot when she's trying to get out of the once the police guy rings back and says, we've spoken to the phone company and that, and the bloke that's been ringing you, like, he's ringing from inside the house, which is like a kind of genre defining line in a film from my point of view. She then runs to the door and tries to open it, but she can't because the chain's on, and she seems to have quite a lot of trouble with that. But while she's doing that, there's this shot of the stairs, and the door at the top of the stairs opens, and so the landing kind of becomes kind of very, very gradually lit. It's just brilliant. And the guy that plays the killer, who I didn't know until last night when I was looking at it, just to get a little bit of some sort of background information about films. Often my wife says it's because I'm hating the film that I'm watching, and I want to see what other people have said, and if they hate it and they've said negative things about it, I will just sit there sniggering at their comments during the film. That wasn't why I did it last night. Last night I did it to get some background story. Tom Beckley, who played the killer, was apparently really, really ill when they were filming it. Terminally ill, actually, because he died not long after it was released. Before it was released, possibly. And so I didn't know that. And so actually there's a number of scenes in it where you kind of think, he's this kind of weak-looking, sad little man. But look at the impact he's having on people. There's the policeman describes how he basically kills these two kids with his bare hands, and that there was kind of little left of them to identify. And we don't see any of that. We don't see any of it. There's not a single moment in the film where we see him killing these kids, apart from a scene 2/3 of the way through where he's kind of having these flashbacks at various points of his sort of recent life. And one of those flashbacks is just a shot or two of him in the kid's bedroom with blood all over his hands. And blood all over the sheets and stuff, and that's all you see. Now, it annoys me. I've often said this about films. It annoys me when a person has a flashback that they're seeing it in the third person. For my mind, if I was to make a film and someone was to have a flashback, I would make a point of filming that flashback in their first person perspective. But that's just me. I let that go. And that's all you see of it. There's no gratuitous kind of bloodshed or anything like you would kind of expect from a film of this kind. The music is brilliant. The music, I forget who the music's by. I have the score open in front of me because I happen to have the score. Dana Kaproff, whoever that is. Don't know who that is. It's very good. That bit that I played, the bit that sort of followed the phone calls bit, this bit, that happens quite a lot during the course of the film, but it's brilliant. It's so effective. All I would say is that there's a few little cues and themes in the score that do seem to borrow quite heavily from Jaws. The obvious kind of Jaws thing, although it's difficult, I guess, to write a score and not have two notes at some point that sound a bit like that. But I don't know, it's just the way it's presented with strings sounded quite reminiscent. And also Psycho, there's a few sort of sweeping Psycho strings in there, but not in a bad way, in a good way. On the whole, loved it. I haven't seen it in years. I saw it a long time ago when I was a kid. I've always kind of held it in quite a high regard. I have seen the remake. It's alright, actually. I enjoyed it. I seem to remember when I looked at the Rotten Tomatoes thing for it. Oh, okay. 33% the original one got 9%. the remake got. So apparently I'm in a minority. Although, weirdly, the audience scores are higher for the remake than the original, which largely underlines the pointlessness of Rotten Tomatoes. Loved it. Yeah, that's really all I wanted to say. Didn't want this to drag on too long. It's been 10 minutes. That's more than long enough. It's really good. It's really tense. It's quite scary. The guy that plays the killer is brilliant in it. We see a lot more of him than perhaps I would like to see of a killer in a film. I'm very much about, as will probably become clear during the course of these podcasts, very much about the unseen. I think what you don't see and what's left to the imagination is much more powerful. But it is a testament, I think, to the guy that played him, no longer with us, sadly. The fact we see so much of the killer doesn't detract from the fact that he is this kind of menacing, scary thing. And the final scene of him in the bedroom with the babysitter and the reveal of where he is in the room, brilliant, masterstroke. I'd forgotten about that, made me jump, brilliant.
Hello?
Wooden ladders, talk to me.